"Back away from my daughter immediately." The words cut through the sterile silence of Chicago Memorial Hospital like a blade. Every head in the pediatric wing turned toward the commotion, where a man in a faded maintenance uniform stood frozen beside the wheelchair of 8-year-old Isabella Chen, daughter of tech mogul Richard Chen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The little girl who hadn't taken a single step in 3 years looked up at her father with confusion. While the janitor's hands remained gently positioned on her shoulders, his voice soft and encouraging just moments before the explosive interruption. 3 months earlier, Marcus Rivera pushed his cleaning cart through the polished corridors of Chicago Memorial Hospital, his reflection ghost-like in the gleaming floors he had just mopped. The 4 a.m. shift was quiet, peaceful even, giving him time to think as he methodically cleaned each room in the pediatric rehabilitation wing. At 35, Marcus had been working as a hospital custodian for 5 years, ever since he'd moved to Chicago with his own daughter after his wife passed away from cancer. The other staff knew him as reliable and soft-spoken, always willing to cover extra shifts, never complaining about the long hours or the modest pay that barely covered rent for their small apartment on the South Side. What they didn't know was that Marcus Rivera had once been Dr. Marcus Rivera, one of the most promising pediatric neurologists in the country. His hands, now rough from handling industrial cleaning equipment, had once performed delicate spinal procedures that gave paralyzed children the chance to walk again. Those same fingers that now scrubbed bathroom tiles had once been featured on the cover of Medical Journal Weekly for pioneering a revolutionary technique in pediatric spinal cord rehabilitation. But that was before the malpractice lawsuit, before the medical board investigation, before his world collapsed around him when a routine procedure went wrong and a young patient suffered complications that ended Marcus's career forever. The settlement had taken everything he owned. The guilt had taken everything he was. When his wife died 6 months later, Marcus packed up their 7-year-old daughter Carmen and disappeared from the medical world entirely, choosing the anonymity of manual labor over the possibility of ever hurting another child. He told Carmen they were starting fresh, that Daddy had a new job helping people in a different way. She never questioned why they moved from their beautiful home in California to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the heating barely worked in winter. Every morning, Marcus would drop Carmen off at Lincoln Elementary before beginning his shift at the hospital. She was a bright kid, always asking questions about the world around her, always drawing pictures of doctors and nurses that she said reminded her of her daddy. Marcus would smile and ruffle her hair, never telling her that he used to be exactly what she was drawing. In the evenings, they would sit together at their small kitchen table, Carmen working on homework while Marcus helped her with math and science, subjects that came naturally to him though he could never explain why. The pediatric wing was Marcus's regular assignment, and over the months, he had become familiar with the long-term patients and their families. He watched children struggle through physical therapy sessions, saw parents weep in hallway corners when they thought no one was looking, witnessed small victories and devastating setbacks. Every day, he forced himself to remain invisible, just another member of the cleaning staff, fighting the urge to offer medical insights that could help these suffering families. It was during one of those quiet morning shifts that Marcus first encountered Isabella Chen. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The 8-year-old sat motionless in her custom wheelchair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the rehabilitation center's main therapy room. Her long, black hair fell like a curtain around her face, hiding eyes that Marcus could see held a depth of sadness no child should ever carry. Isabella had been coming to Chicago Memorial for intensive physical therapy 3 times a week for the past 2 years, ever since a horseback riding accident had severed her spinal cord and left her paralyzed from the waist down. Richard Chen, her father, was a name everyone in Chicago knew. His technology company had revolutionized cloud computing and made him one of the wealthiest men in the Midwest. The local newspapers frequently featured stories about his business empire, his charitable foundations, and his devastating personal tragedy. Since his wife's death in a car accident when Isabella was 5, Richard had thrown himself into his work while struggling to connect with his grieving daughter. The riding accident 3 years later had only deepened the chasm between them, leaving Richard feeling helpless and Isabella retreating further into silence. Marcus had observed their interactions during his cleaning rounds. Richard would arrive at the hospital in his expensive suits, checking his phone constantly during Isabella's therapy sessions. He would speak to the doctors and therapists in the same commanding tone he probably used in boardroom meetings, demanding progress reports and treatment timelines as if recovery could be scheduled like a business merger. Isabella never spoke during these visits, simply enduring the conversations happening around her, as if she were an object being discussed rather than a little girl fighting to reclaim her life. The medical team at Chicago Memorial was among the best in the country. Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of pediatric rehabilitation, had trained at Johns Hopkins and had successfully treated hundreds of spinal cord injuries in children. Physical therapist James Morrison had 20 years of experience and had developed several innovative techniques for mobility training. Yet despite their expertise and Isabella's access to the most advanced equipment money could buy, her progress had stagnated. The medical records that Marcus glimpsed during his cleaning showed a concerning pattern of plateau followed by regression, hope followed by disappointment. What troubled Marcus most as he watched Isabella's sessions was not the lack of physical progress, but the absence of emotional engagement. The child had given up. He could see it in the way she mechanically followed instructions without enthusiasm, the way she stared blankly ahead during exercises, the way she never smiled or showed any sign of joy. Her body might have been paralyzed, but her spirit had been crushed, and Marcus knew from his years of medical training that healing the spirit was often the key to healing the body. During his breaks, Marcus would sometimes find himself pausing outside the therapy room, listening to the sessions. He heard Dr. Wells explaining complex medical terminology to Isabella in clinical terms that would confuse most adults. He heard James Morrison counting repetitions and adjusting equipment with professional efficiency. What he didn't hear was anyone talking to Isabella like she was a scared little girl who had lost everything she loved and didn't understand why the world had become so dark and painful. One Tuesday morning, Marcus was cleaning the therapy room when Isabella arrived early for her session. She wheeled herself to her usual spot by the window and sat quietly, waiting for her appointment to begin. Marcus continued his work, stealing glances at the child who seemed so utterly alone, despite being surrounded by people who cared about her medical condition. Something about her posture, the way her small shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to disappear, reminded him of his own daughter during those terrible months after her mother died. As Marcus moved closer to clean the windows near Isabella's wheelchair, he noticed she was humming softly to herself. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a song he didn't recognize but that seemed to carry all the sadness in the world. Without thinking, he paused in his cleaning and listened. When the humming stopped, he looked down and found Isabella staring at him with curious eyes, the first time he had seen her make direct eye contact with anyone. "That was beautiful," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What song was that?" Isabella's eyes widened slightly, surprised that someone had noticed her private moment. "It's something my mama used to sing," she replied, her voice so soft Marcus had to lean closer to hear. "Before she went to heaven." The simple words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a child who had lost her mother, lost her ability to walk, lost her connection to her father, and yet she was still carrying her mother's song inside her heart. In that moment, Marcus saw past the expensive wheelchair and designer clothes to the fundamental truth that medical charts and treatment plans couldn't capture. Isabella wasn't just a spinal cord injury case number. She was a little girl drowning in grief who needed someone to see her pain and help her remember that life could still hold beauty. "Your mama had good taste in music," Marcus said, returning to his cleaning but staying close enough to continue the conversation. "I bet she had a beautiful voice too." Isabella nodded, a tiny smile flickering across her face for just an instant before disappearing again. "She used to sing me to sleep every night. She said music could heal anything, even the saddest hearts." Marcus felt his own heart clench with recognition. His wife had said something similar during her final weeks in the hospital, when the cancer had taken her voice but not her spirit. She had whispered to him that healing wasn't always about fixing what was broken. Sometimes it was about learning to find joy despite the brokenness. "Your mama sounds like a very wise woman," Marcus replied, finishing the last window and preparing to move on to the next room. Maybe she's still singing to you, just in a different way. Isabella tilted her head, considering this possibility. Do you really think so? Marcus paused at the doorway, looking back at the little girl who was watching him with an expression of tentative hope. I think mamas never really stop taking care of their babies, even when we can't see them anymore. Maybe her songs are still there, waiting for you to remember how to hear them. As Marcus left the room, he didn't notice Richard Chen standing in the hallway, having arrived early to observe his daughter's therapy session. Richard had heard the entire conversation, had seen his daughter's face light up with more animation than she had shown in months. For the first time since the accident, Isabella had engaged with another person about something other than medical procedures or physical limitations. She had talked about her mother, about music, about the possibility of hope. Richard found himself wondering who this custodian was and how he had managed to reach his daughter in ways that dozens of highly trained medical professionals had failed to achieve. The following week, Marcus found himself looking forward to those brief encounters with Isabella. Each morning as he cleaned the therapy room, she would arrive a few minutes early and they would exchange a few words about music, about her mother, about small observations that seemed to matter to her in ways the medical staff couldn't understand. Marcus was careful to keep their conversations brief and appropriate, but he couldn't help noticing how Isabella's demeanor began to shift slightly. The rigid posture in her wheelchair softened. The blank stare out the window was occasionally replaced by curious glances around the room. Most importantly, she had started humming again, not just her mother's lullaby, but other melodies that seemed to spring from some deep well of memory and emotion. Dr. Wells noticed the change during Isabella's Thursday session. She seems more engaged today, the doctor mentioned to James Morrison as they prepared Isabella for her exercises. Her muscle tension is different, less guarded. Have you modified anything in her treatment plan? James shook his head, equally puzzled by the subtle but unmistakable shift in their patient's presentation. Nothing's changed on my end. Maybe she's finally ready to start making some real progress. What neither medical professional realized was that Isabella had begun looking forward to something again. For the first time since her accident, she had found an adult who spoke to her about things that mattered to her heart rather than just her medical condition. Marcus never asked her to perform exercises or described her limitations in clinical terms. Instead, he talked to her about the beauty he noticed in small things, the way morning light painted patterns on the hospital walls, the interesting people he observed during his work, the stories his own daughter told him about school and friends. Richard Chen had also begun arriving earlier for Isabella's appointments, positioning himself where he could observe these interactions between his daughter and the custodian. What he witnessed troubled and intrigued him in equal measure. This maintenance worker, this man who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans, was connecting with Isabella in ways that Richard's expensive team of specialists had been unable to achieve. More troubling was the recognition that this stranger was having conversations with his daughter that Richard himself hadn't managed to have since her accident. The breakthrough moment came on a rainy Wednesday morning in late October. Marcus was cleaning the therapy room when Isabella arrived for her session, but instead of her usual quiet demeanor, she seemed agitated and upset. Tears streaked down her face, and her hands gripped the wheels of her wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. Marcus had learned enough about Isabella's schedule to know that she had just come from a consultation with a new specialist, another expert brought in to evaluate her case and provide recommendations for her continued care. "Hey there," Marcus said gently, setting down his cleaning supplies and approaching Isabella's wheelchair. "Rough morning?" Isabella looked up at him with eyes full of anger and despair. "The new doctor says I'll never walk again," she said, her voice breaking. "He says my daddy needs to accept that and stop wasting money on therapy that isn't working. He says I should focus on adapting to life in a wheelchair instead of hoping for something impossible." Marcus felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same anger he had carried for years toward medical professionals who delivered devastating news without considering the emotional impact on their patients. He had watched colleagues reduce children to diagnoses and statistics, forgetting that behind every case file was a human being with dreams and fears and an innate need for hope. What this specialist had told Isabella might have been medically accurate, but it was delivered without compassion or understanding of what those words would do to an 8-year-old's fragile spirit. "What do you think about what he said?" Marcus asked, crouching down beside Isabella's wheelchair so they were at eye level. I think he's probably right, Isabella whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Everyone keeps trying to help me, but nothing changes. Maybe I'm just broken in a way that can't be fixed. The word broken hit Marcus like a physical blow. He recognized the self-defeating language that children used when they had internalized the limitations others placed on them. It was the same vocabulary he had heard from countless young patients who had given up on themselves because the adults around them had focused more on managing expectations than nurturing possibilities. "Can I tell you a secret?" Marcus said, his voice low and conspiratorial. Isabella nodded, curious despite her pain. "I don't think you're broken at all. I think you're exactly like a butterfly that's still in its cocoon." Isabella frowned, not understanding the comparison. "What do you mean?" Marcus settled more comfortably on the floor beside her wheelchair, abandoning his cleaning duties entirely. "Well, when a caterpillar goes into its cocoon, it doesn't look like much is happening from the outside. People might look at that cocoon and think the caterpillar is stuck, maybe even dying. But inside, something incredible is taking place. The caterpillar is transforming into something completely different, something that can do things it never could before." "But butterflies can fly," Isabella said sadly. "I can't even walk." "That's true," Marcus acknowledged. "But here's the thing about butterflies that most people don't know. They don't learn to fly right away. When they first come out of their cocoon, their wings are soft and folded. They have to sit very still and let their wings dry and strengthen. Sometimes it takes hours, sometimes longer. And during that time, they might wonder if they'll ever be able to use those wings at all." Isabella was listening intently now, her tears slowing as she focused on Marcus's words. "What if their wings never work?" "Well, that's the amazing thing," Marcus continued. "The butterfly doesn't decide whether its wings will work based on what other caterpillars or even other butterflies tell it. It listens to something deeper, something inside itself that knows what it was meant to become. And when the time is right, when its wings are ready, it doesn't think about flying. It just spreads its wings and discovers what was always possible." For a long moment, Isabella sat quietly, processing the metaphor. "Do you think I could be like a butterfly?" Marcus looked into her eyes, seeing not a disabled child but a little girl full of untapped potential. "I think you already are. I think you've been in your cocoon, getting stronger in ways that the doctors can't measure with their tests and machines. And I think your mama's songs are still there, waiting to help your wings remember how to carry you." "But what if I never get better?" Isabella asked, voicing the fear that haunted her daily. "What if you get better in ways that no one expects?" Marcus replied. "What if your wings work differently than everyone thinks they should? What if the way you fly turns out to be more beautiful than anyone imagined?" Isabella was quiet for several minutes, her face reflecting deep thought. Finally, she looked at Marcus with an expression of tentative determination. "Will you help me listen for my mama's songs? Will you help me remember how to let my wings dry?" Marcus felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. This was why he had become a doctor in the first place, to help children find hope when the world seemed hopeless. "I'd be honored to help you listen," he said quietly, "but you have to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't give up on your wings just because other people can't see them yet." Isabella nodded solemnly. "I promise." Neither of them noticed Richard Chen standing in the doorway, having witnessed the entire conversation. For the first time since his wife's death, Richard saw his daughter engage with genuine hope and determination. This custodian had given Isabella something that all his money and all the medical expertise he had purchased could not provide. He had given her a reason to believe in possibilities beyond her current limitations. The transformation in Isabella was subtle at first, but unmistakable to those who knew her well. During her physical therapy sessions, she began asking questions about her exercises instead of simply enduring them. She started requesting specific music to be played during her treatments, songs that reminded her of her mother, or melodies that Marcus had hummed while cleaning nearby. Most significantly, she began talking about her future in terms of possibilities rather than limitations, referencing the butterfly metaphor that had become her private source of strength. Dr. Wells was the first to document the change in Isabella's medical records. "Patient demonstrates increased motivation and engagement during therapeutic interventions," she wrote. "Notable improvement in pain tolerance and willingness to attempt challenging exercises." Recommend psychological evaluation to assess factors contributing to enhanced cooperation. What the doctor couldn't quantify in her clinical notes was the light that had returned to Isabella's eyes, the way she held her head higher, the small smile that occasionally graced her face during particularly difficult moments. James Morrison, the physical therapist, began incorporating Isabella's newfound metaphorical framework into their sessions. "Let's work on strengthening those wing muscles today," he would say, as they focused on core stability exercises. "Your butterfly body needs to be ready for whatever comes next." Isabella would giggle at these references, a sound that hadn't been heard in the rehabilitation center for months. Her laughter was infectious, brightening the entire therapy room and inspiring other young patients who witnessed her newfound determination. Marcus continued his morning conversations with Isabella, carefully maintaining the boundaries of his custodial role while providing the emotional support that seemed to fuel her progress. He would arrive at the therapy room a few minutes before her scheduled sessions, timing his cleaning duties to coincide with her early arrivals. Their talks evolved beyond the butterfly metaphor to encompass broader discussions about resilience, hope, and the different ways that strength could manifest itself. "My mama used to say that some people are flowers and some people are trees," Isabella shared one morning as Marcus organized the therapy equipment. "Flowers are beautiful and bright, but they need perfect conditions to grow. Trees can grow anywhere, even in rocky soil or harsh weather." She said I was her little tree. Marcus paused in his work, struck by the wisdom in this simple observation. "What kind of tree do you think you are?" Isabella considered the question seriously. "Maybe an oak tree. They're really strong, and they live for a long time. Even when storms come, they bend, but they don't break. And their roots go so deep that nothing can knock them over." "That sounds exactly right," Marcus agreed. "Oak trees also provide shelter for other creatures. Birds build nests in their branches, and smaller plants grow under their protection. Maybe that's part of your purpose too, helping other people find strength when they need it." These conversations began to influence Isabella's interactions with other patients in the rehabilitation center. She started wheeling herself over to younger children who were struggling with their exercises, offering encouragement and sharing her butterfly story. Her presence became a source of inspiration for other families dealing with similar challenges, though Isabella herself seemed unaware of the impact she was having on others. Richard Chen watched these developments with growing amazement and concern. His daughter was clearly benefiting from her interactions with this mysterious custodian, but Richard knew nothing about the man's background or qualifications to be counseling his child. The protective father in him wanted to intervene, to demand credentials and explanations. Yet the results spoke for themselves. Isabella was making more progress in a few weeks than she had achieved in the previous 6 months of intensive therapy. Driven by both curiosity and caution, Richard began conducting discreet inquiries about Marcus Rivera. What he discovered initially seemed to confirm his worst fears. Marcus had no current medical license, no credentials in child psychology, no official training in pediatric rehabilitation. Public records showed a history of financial difficulties, a modest apartment in a questionable neighborhood, and employment history limited to manual labor positions. On the surface, Marcus appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be: a hospital custodian with no special qualifications, determination, despite the criticism she was facing. He thought about the weeks of progress, the return of Isabella's smile, the way she had begun talking about her future with hope instead of despair. "Dr. Brennan," Richard said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire. "I think you misunderstand the nature of healing. My daughter has made more progress in the past month than in the previous year of conventional treatment. If that progress comes from believing in butterflies and trees and the strength that grows in rocky soil, then I support every word this man has shared with her." Dr. Brennan's face flushed with professional indignation. "Mr. Chen, with all due respect, your daughter needs medical intervention, not fairy tales. This custodian is not qualified to provide psychological counseling, and his influence could be setting her up for devastating disappointment when reality sets in." Before Richard could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices and the obvious distress on Isabella's face. He took in the scene quickly: the aggressive specialist, the defensive father, and most importantly, Isabella shrinking back into her wheelchair, as if trying to disappear from the conflict swirling around her. "I apologize for interrupting," Marcus said quietly, addressing Dr. Brennan with professional courtesy. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my interactions with Isabella." Dr. Brennan turned toward him with barely concealed contempt. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Rivera. You're a maintenance worker who has overstepped professional boundaries by counseling a vulnerable child. Your romantic notions about butterflies and recovery are medically irresponsible and potentially harmful." Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment and dismissal, the automatic assumption that his current job defined his qualifications and knowledge. But as he looked at Isabella, who was watching him with trust and hope, he made a decision that would change everything. "You're absolutely right that I'm not qualified to counsel Isabella in my current capacity," he said. "But perhaps you should know that I'm Dr. Marcus Rivera, formerly of the California Institute of Pediatric Neurology." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Brennan's expression shifted from contempt to confusion to shock as the implications of Marcus's revelation sank in. James Morrison's eyes widened with recognition, having heard of Dr. Rivera's pioneering work in spinal cord rehabilitation. Richard Chen felt a mixture of vindication and concern, finally understanding why this mysterious custodian had seemed so knowledgeable about medical procedures. "That's impossible," Dr. Brennan stammered. "Dr. Marcus Rivera lost his medical license years ago after a malpractice incident. His career was destroyed." "Yes," Marcus replied with quiet dignity. "It was. A 7-year-old boy named David Martinez suffered complications during a procedure I performed to repair his damaged spinal cord. Despite our best efforts, David experienced additional paralysis instead of the improvement we hoped for. His family sued, my license was suspended, and I chose to walk away from medicine rather than fight the charges." Isabella listened to this revelation with growing understanding. The man who had helped her find hope again had once been a doctor who tried to help children like her. He had suffered his own devastating loss, his own moment when everything he believed about himself was shattered. "But David Martinez wasn't your fault," Dr. Brennan said slowly, pieces of memory falling into place. "I remember reading about that case in medical journals. The complication was caused by pre-existing tissue damage that wasn't visible on any imaging. 3 independent reviews concluded that the procedure was performed flawlessly, and the outcome was unforeseeable." Marcus's composure finally cracked slightly, years of carried guilt evident in his voice. "The reviews don't matter. A child was hurt worse because of a decision I made. I couldn't risk that happening again." Isabella wheeled her chair closer to Marcus, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Is that why you understand about broken wings?" she asked softly. "Because yours got broken too?" The simple question, asked with such innocent wisdom, brought tears to Marcus's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. I thought my wings were too damaged to ever help anyone fly again. But you helped me," Isabella said with absolute certainty. "You taught me that being broken doesn't mean being defeated. You showed me that healing happens in different ways than people expect." Richard Chen watched this exchange with growing emotion. Here was a man who had given up everything he was to avoid the possibility of causing harm, yet had found a way to help his daughter heal using nothing more than kindness, wisdom, and hope. The irony was profound. Marcus had abandoned his medical practice to protect children, but had continued healing them in ways that no medical degree could teach. Dr. Brennan struggled to process this new information. "Dr. Rivera, your work in pediatric neurology was groundbreaking. The techniques you developed are still being used in rehabilitation centers worldwide. Why are you working as a custodian?" "Because," Marcus replied, looking down at Isabella's trusting face, "I learned that healing isn't always about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about helping people discover they were never broken in the first place." Over the following weeks, word of Marcus's true identity spread through Chicago Memorial Hospital. The medical staff reacted with a mixture of awe, confusion, and respect for the man who had been quietly moving among them while carrying such an extraordinary background. Dr. Wells approached him with offers to consult on difficult cases. James Morrison sought his advice on innovative therapy techniques. Hospital administrators began discussing the possibility of creating a position that would allow Marcus to work with patients again. But the most significant change came in Isabella's official treatment plan. Working together, Marcus and the medical team developed an integrated approach that combined cutting-edge physical therapy with the emotional and psychological support that Marcus provided so naturally. Isabella's progress accelerated dramatically as her medical care aligned with her emotional needs. 3 months later, on a sunny Tuesday morning, Isabella arrived at the therapy room with unusual excitement. She had been working with a new piece of equipment designed to help patients with partial spinal cord function attempt supported walking. The device wasn't expected to produce miracles, but it allowed patients to experience the sensation of upright movement while their muscles gradually strengthened. Marcus was cleaning nearby when Isabella called out to him. "Marcus, watch this," she said, her voice bright with anticipation. With James Morrison's assistance, she activated the walking support system and took her first tentative steps since the accident 3 years earlier. They were small, uncertain movements, but they were steps nonetheless. The therapy room erupted in cheers from staff and other patients who had gathered to witness this moment. Isabella beamed with pride and joy, but her eyes sought out Marcus specifically. "I told you I was a butterfly," she said, slightly breathless from the effort. "I just needed time to let my wings dry." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he watched this remarkable child take her first steps back toward the life she had thought was lost forever. "You're absolutely right," he said. "You're the most beautiful butterfly I've ever seen." Richard Chen, who had witnessed the entire scene, approached Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude. "I owe you an apology," he said, "and much more than that. You gave my daughter something that all my money couldn't buy. You gave her back her belief in herself." As Isabella continued her walking practice, supported by the device but powered by her own determination, Marcus realized that his own healing had been happening alongside hers. He had spent years believing that his broken wings made him unfit to help others fly, but Isabella had shown him that true healing came not from perfection, but from the courage to keep trying despite past failures. Dr. Brennan, who had observed the entire transformation, approached Marcus with humility. "I was wrong about everything," she admitted. "You weren't giving Isabella false hope. You were teaching her that hope itself is a form of medicine." 6 months later, Isabella took her first unassisted steps across the therapy room, her face radiant with joy and determination. Marcus had returned to medicine in a consulting capacity, working with families whose children needed the kind of healing that went beyond medical procedures. And in a small frame on Isabella's wheelchair, now used only occasionally, was a drawing she had made of a butterfly emerging from its cocoon, with the words, "Dr. Marcus helped me remember my wings," written in careful 8-year-old handwriting. The magic words hadn't been a single phrase, but rather a continuous conversation about possibility, resilience, and the different ways that healing could manifest. Marcus had whispered to Isabella that she was stronger than she knew, more capable than others believed, and worthy of hope even when the world seemed hopeless. Sometimes the most powerful magic is simply helping someone remember who they really are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.